Hey, how's it going, everyone? This episode is basically a continuation of my comping example from the last video for the Charlie Parker tune Confirmation. So if you haven't watched that yet, it'd probably be best to check that out first. I'm not going to waste any time, and I'm going to jump right back into where I left off, which is pretty much just the start of the second main fragment of my example, alright? And just to give you a quick little refresher or reminder, I'm going to quickly play a clip from the last episode just to kind of introduce this part that I'm going to be talking about here again, alright? So here it is. So, moving along, let's go ahead now and take a listen to the next phrase of this melody. And I'm going to start this at the end of the last phrase we just looked at, just so that we could hear the space that lays between these two phrases, alright? So, here it is. First, I'm going to play this phrase on the guitar again, just so that we can clearly hear it and understand what we're going to relate to. So, basically, it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And for the rest of whatever we look at in this video today, I think it'll be more beneficial if I start with the demonstration. So I'm going to start from the beginning again so that we can hear how it flows into the next part. I'm going to add the next part, and I'm going to sing the melody along as I comp my example, alright? So, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, cool. And before I go right back into it, I'll just remind you that the only thing I discussed for this little fragment so far is just the rhythmic placement of the first chord in this little fragment, alright? And that was on the and of 3 in the bar coming up to the next, alright? So we're going to get back into it now. Real quick, again, the PDF for this example is available on my website for only $3, as well as my Patreon, and I'm just bringing this up because I think for this particular example and for this video, as well as the others to come, I think it could really be helpful for some people if some of the stuff I'm saying here may seem a little confusing, or this is kind of like new stuff for you. I think it could be a great supplement to the video itself, alright? So if this is confusing, make sure to check that out because I guarantee it'll help you out. Now, as far as the voicing itself, we're in the second half of bar 3, and the general harmony is G7. Because I'm not rhythmically hitting with a melody note, the top note of my voicing can be a little bit more open to interpretation. So I'm going to play the voicing for you first here. Basically, what I chose was this D flat major triad, specifically a first inversion of a D flat major triad over the root / bass note of G, giving us this chord, alright? And the top note of my voicing is D flat, the root of that major triad, okay? So that. If we were to analyze the notes of the D flat major triad intervallally over a root note G, which is what we have here, to create some sort of a G chord, we basically get a G7 flat 9 with a flat 5 and just no third in it, which is fine, right? So this is a valid option that we could use over a dominant chord, so it works, and this unique flavor of a dominant chord typically relates to the whole dominant diminished sound specifically, and this choice often works great when you're basically resolving to a minor chord, which is what we have, because we're going to the C minor next. In this case, the D flat note at the top of the voicing isn't really the most clearly logical choice here per se, and it doesn't always have to be when you're picking your voicings, but I'll still point out some things that I may have been considering when I ultimately arrived at whatever choice I made. First, let's look at the notes that were right before and right after the space that I put this chord in, alright? So, the note that came right before was an F, when it basically went this note over here, okay, that's the F. And then, the note that came right after is A, when it goes this note, okay? What can often be the logical choices for this top note here would be first to consider using either one of these two notes, or perhaps you may be able to put a note that falls in between these two notes, kind of acting as a scalar passing tone of some sort. So in this case, that would be like the note G, because we went, something like that. My choice was D flat. That doesn't fit any of that criteria, but there was a D flat in the melody that came right before in the first phrase when it went that right there. Okay? So if I use that as my melody note, that might, have an effect on how it sounds when we kind of play that note again. There's one more interesting thing to consider when it comes to my choice for this voicing and the top note, but in order to understand it, we need to first look at the next chord now. So the next chord that I play is this pretty common and practical voicing for C minor 11 that sounds great, and it sounds like this, right? A lot of people know this voicing kind of as like the so what voicing, because if I do it in D minor, move that up, you get that, alright? But this is a relatively easy voicing to play on the guitar, and it sounds great. So the basic harmonic progression of the last two chords is G7 going to C minor, or a simple minor 5-1 type of cadence. But the thing that's so interesting about the way the notes in these two voicings move from one to another is that if we look at the top of the C minor 11 voicing, the top three strings, we have a E flat major triad, and we already know that our G7 chord has a D flat major triad on the top of it. So when we go from one to the other, what we end up with is the sound of a major triad moving up a whole step to another major triad, and that sort of consistency can sound really good to our ears. Now, the voicing that I have for the C minor 7 versus the G7 is more specific, and that's because it's rhythmically hitting at the same time as a melody note. So I put this chord on the downbeat of 1 on the next measure, and that's where we go to C minor, alright? So this is something similar to like what we had with the very first chord in this example, where the phrase itself is starting on the and of 4, but it's leading into the stronger melodic note on the downbeat of 1, where the phrase goes 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that's really the strong note, and that's the note that I'm harmonizing, that G, right? So that's the top note of this chord, and it basically leaves us with a nice choice like this that basically, I don't want to say it locks it into place, but we have this second inversion E flat triad over here. So from a point of view of good voice leading, we may think that if we're going to this second inversion with this chord, wouldn't we want our D flat major triad to be second inversion as well? Because this is first inversion. The second inversion, we could play it like this, right? And not only that, but this top note in this case is actually related to one of the melody notes, because if I'm coming back from the previous measure, it's like, it's like, that's what the melody's doing, which is that note, right? But if you compare the two, I actually just think the one that I ended up with sounds better, okay? Because, let's see, it's like, right? Not bad. But the one I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I just think it sounds better. And either way, we have the same sort of harmonic movement happening, so it's all good. Moving along, there's two more chords that I play during this second phrase, and in actuality, I kind of see this second phrase as really like two separate phrases, because it's like, it's kind of like the first one, and the second one is, right? But let's just see where I put these chords now. After the C minor 11, the next chord that I play is this F7 sharp 5 voicing, which is actually the same shape or inversion or voicing that we just had with the A7 chord before when I went this one, right? It's like a third inversion of like a dominant chord with a sharp 5, right? So for F7, basically it's the note in the bass is a whole step below the root of the chord. So if I'm thinking F7, I go down a whole step, that's where I play it on that string set, okay? I'm putting this chord on the downbeat of 3, which is technically filling up a little bit of space or moment of rest in this phrase that only lasts an eighth note long. So basically, if I'm coming from the beginning of this phrase, it's like right? The general harmony here in the second half of this bar is F7, which is acting as the 5-7 going to a B flat 7, like a tonic dominant that we do resolve to next. And the top note that I put in my voicing is F, which is the root. Okay? Now, this note F is the very next note that comes in the melody, and it's really interesting. It really sounds good here if we bring out that note, because when it comes in the melody, it comes right after on the and of 3, but the way it kind of sounds, specifically in the first A section of this tune, it's almost like it's a variation, like a displaced note, where, because, what we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But it's almost like it could have worked originally if it just went straight to the downbeat of 3, like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? That's almost like the more conventional version of it. So naturally, if we play something on a strong beat there, like the downbeat of 3 with that same note, it should probably sound good because the melody is almost like the syncopated version of that in a way anyway. And that's what we have, and it ends up sounding good. If I come a little bit beforehand. And then we have the next phrase. So the next chord that I play actually hits at the start of the second little part of this phrase, and that's on the and of 4. Okay, basically what I'm doing is right. So because this is on the and of 4, for the general harmony, you're really thinking of it more as like a syncopation of the harmony in the next measure. So that would be B flat 7. It's just like a syncopated version. And plus, if you look at the note there on the and of 4 in the melody, that note is B flat. All right. Now the chord that I'm playing is basically what you may think is like a D half diminished chord, which is basically like a B flat 9 anyway, and then I just add the top note to put that note in the melody, and it works as my B flat 7, right? It's basically like a B flat 9 chord. Now, if you actually look at what's going on melodically here, even though we have another note right after on a strong beat, the downbeat of 1, because the phrase is going, it's actually functioning as like a neighboring tone or like an embellishment type of a thing where the B flat is really the strong tone, and plus we go right back to it anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So therefore, I think it sounded better in this case to actually play the chord on the and of 4 versus, maybe supporting it on the downbeat of 1 like we were doing with some of the other chords before. Putting this chord here on the and of 4 also works really well rhythmically with the other two chords before it, and it kind of creates this very common jazz comping rhythm where we have 2 downbeats and then a syncopation. It's like the downbeat of 1, downbeat of 3, and then the and of 4, which is like a syncopated version of 1 of the next measure, basically. So all of them together, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, right? After this, I decide to let the rest of the phrase breathe as it plays out, and I just kind of lay back and don't play anything at all and let it fill up the space. So if I were to play everything from the beginning, 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Now we can go on to the next part. Alright. I'm only going to add a little bit more today just so that we could at least get through the whole first A section of this form. To me, I'd say that there's really 2 distinct phrases left in the melody for this first A section, but we're just going to look at all of it as a singular unit or fragment for my example. I'm going to play this part of the recording for you now, starting at the end of the previous phrase. Okay, here's this part of the melody on guitar. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And now I'll play this part of the example for you as I sing the melody along with it, and I'll start from the end of the phrase before it again. Alright, so it's basically like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the first chord of this next part, I hit rhythmically with the melody right back in at the start of the next phrase. The last chord that I played was at the start of the phrase before, so because I let it breathe a little, it felt good to hit here right at the beginning of this next phrase. This hits on the and of one of the next measure, and the note in the melody here is a C natural. Basically goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. This note. Now, although the general harmony for this bar is A minor 7 to D7, and typically we would probably more so think A minor 7 if we're talking about the and of one of this bar, the voicing that I chose can really be interpreted as relating to both of these harmonies. We should realize that this is a 2-5 progression, A minor 7 to D7, and oftentimes, depending on the context, we may choose to simplify it down to thinking of just the 2 chord A minor 7 or just the 5 chord D7, acting more as just a single tonality and function. And usually in this case, in this key, that would be to resolve to some sort of tonic with a root note G, which is exactly what it does in this tune. The voicing that I play here is really an A diminished 7th chord with the note C, the melody note, on top, which is the minor third of the chord, alright? So this is the voicing, alright? And you may not realize this, but this shape or voicing is actually the exact same voicing as what we may conventionally see as a more common diminished voicing on these top 4 strings. This is still an A diminished 7th, which is symmetrical, so that could be E flat diminished, F sharp diminished, C diminished, it's all the same thing, but it's the same voicing as this, just looks different on a different string set, and it's just in the lower octave. A diminished 7th, like I said before, relates to E flat diminished 7th, which you may see more clearly as relating to D7 through that dominant diminished relationship, but either way, I like to see this diminished functionally within a key as the 2 diminished 7th, which is what it is if we're thinking of it as a tonal center of a G root note. We have A diminished 7th, the 2 diminished, and the 2 diminished to me basically functions like a 5-7 chord in that key center. This chord is basically like a D7 flat 9 with the 5th in the bass and no root, alright? The chord works perfectly for this situation here and has a nice dissonant sound to it. Moving along, the next chord that I play also hits with a melody note, and this is coming in on the and of 4 of the same bar. I thought it sounded good to accentuate this note because within the context of this phrase, this is a higher note that we're really leaping up to from what came right before, alright? So if we listen to this phrase, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So this note, right? Right before, we're like here, and then it jumps up, right? So that combined with the fact that that note is being held out a little bit longer, right, it sounded and felt natural to really bring that note out, which is the B natural, all right? Now, this and of 4, like I said before with some of the other chords, is really like an anticipation of the next bar. So for the general harmony, I'm thinking G7, which is basically like a 2-7 chord within the main key of this song, F major, right? Now, the voicing that I play is this pretty common and stock G13 chord that I'm sure a lot of you guys know, and it does have that B natural note in it, but it's not the top note of the chord, which is a little bit different from what I've been doing every time I'm trying to basically harmonize one of these notes from the melody. So when we look at the context, it kind of shows why it still sounds good. So within the context of that phrase, when we get there, it continues like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, right? So that next note is that 13 that it's going up to, all right? And then, yes, it's going here, but, one other thing that I'm doing with this voicing that I haven't done yet in this example is the articulation of it is longer, and I'm holding it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's almost like implying that happening in the melody anyway, and it doesn't really affect it. It still sounds good even though we're going to this after. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So you can see that it still sounds good, and it's important to consider the articulation and how long you want to hold these chords out as well, alright? And then finally, the last chord, really, for now, is another anticipation, the and of 4 of this bar now, which is, implying the harmony of the next bar, which is C7. the 5 chord that will go to F major, of course, and in the melody, it's doing this, right? So that melody actually starts on the and 4 with these quick, like 16th note passing tones, and that note is basically the sharp 9 of C. So that's the chord I play, this stock C7 sharp 9 voicing, and I play it quick because it quickly melodically goes down here, right? So I don't think it would have sounded as good if I held that one out again, like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's better to cut it off. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then that's the start of the next A section, but I just resolve right back there on the downbeat with that basic F major chord. All right, so I'm just gonna leave it there today, so it doesn't go on forever. And in the next episode,
hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey,
I'm gonna continue breaking down this example, and I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cover the other 2 A sections of this tune, because there's obviously similarities to the first A section, but there's variation and there's certain things that I'm doing differently. So I think I'll take one episode to just kind of show you some of the different things and some of the other A sections of this tune, and then after that I'll probably do the bridge, and that'll be it for the analysis and breakdown of this example. But there's a lot of good stuff harmonically, obviously, to be learned in these videos here. This stuff is new to you, alright? So I hope that you're digging it. If anyone has any questions or anything that they want to say, please put it in the comments. I'm here to help. And that's it. So if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like. Consider becoming a subscriber as well as a contributor to Patreon, where you'll get all the videos on this channel for only $5 a month. If you think anyone else would enjoy the content, please share it with them as well. And I will see you guys in episode 77.
Swinging and playing the blues. That's what we about.
I try to help you.